Hey, how you doing? It's Will here, and this is my going to be my prediction tape for UFC 162, which is happening next week. I'm about 4 or 5 days early, sitting in the house bored, not doing much, so I thought I'd pop the video out now instead of me doing it when I'm back at work next week. It will be on July the 6th from the MGM Grand Garden Arena in Las Vegas, Nevada, and it's headlined by the greatest fight in mixed martial arts today. I don't like saying that very much because I think John Jones is, but I think Anderson Silva just now has it, where he's got a really tough defence of his title here against Chris Weidman, um, who is undefeated in his young MMA career and looks very dangerous, and a lot of people are picking him. And I'll tell you my prediction for that later. I want to go back to UFC 161, which was a couple of weeks ago in Winnipeg. I think the injuries really hurt the card in the end up. Crowd was awesome, but I think the standout performers of the night were James Krause, who I thought looked unbelievable, looked really good in his UFC debut, and Stipe Miocic, who I've always been a big fan of. I didn't think he'd do that to Roy Nelson, and he showed his true class, and he can be a little bit of a threat in the heavyweight division. But as I say, we're back here in Las Vegas for a huge card. A little bit bummed about the Korean Zombie being pulled off. Majorly bummed out about Anthony Pettis getting injured against Jose Aldo. So now the Korean Zombie moves up to face Jose Aldo later in the year. So we'll go all the way at the start of the card. We have Mike Pierce against David Mitchell down in the welterweight division. Mike Pierce, never been a big fan. My girl on Twitter, Foxy, loves the guy. I call him the Can Crusher. And Foxy, if you're watching this, I apologise. You're going to come at me full bore. But we've had our disagreements in the past and we always get through it. This is another can for him to crush, I think. Very, very easily. I can see him knocking out David Mitchell, who is he's not great. Mike Pierce is a decent fighter. I've never been big on him, but he is a decent fighter. But David Mitchell needs to win this fight. He's coming off a win over Simeon Thorson, but his previous two fights were losses by decision to Paulo Thiago and TJ Wahlberger. He's got a 12-2 record. I just think he needs to win this fight or he's not going to be in the UFC. UFC are kind of letting people go with a couple of losses. In the last week or so, Nation Burrows a couple. And I say Mike Pierce is coming off a win over Seth Brzezinski. He's actually on a 3-fight win streak at the minute. It could have been 4. It was kind of him versus Josh Koscheck way back at UFC 143. At the time, I had it for Josh Koscheck, but it could have went either way, and I couldn't really be pissed off if it did go to Mike Pierce. And before that, he beat Paul Bradley before losing to Johnny Hendricks. Before that, so he's on a 3-fight win streak with a couple of really good wins. Hosha, he beat by decision, and he knocked out Aaron Simpson and beat Seth Brzezinski UFC away over in Australia last year. So this has got Mike Pierce knockout written all over it. I think he'll do it in the first round as well. So yeah, Mike Pierce, second round knockout. Next we've got Seth Brzezinski against Brian Melicon. Melicon, I think he fought in Strikeforce a couple of times. Isaac Valley Flag was one of them. Don't really know much about him. I think he won his next fight in the Strikeforce Challengers events. I think it's a 6-2 record. Fights out of Houston. And he's against Seth Brzezinski here, who was an Ultimate Fighter a few years back. I think it was the 14th season, I could be wrong. But yeah, he's coming off a loss to Mike Pierce, as I was saying, last year in December. So he's been out for quite a while. He's a little bit itching to get back in there. Before that, he came off 3 or 4 really good wins. He beat Matt Brown, who's on a tear at the minute in the division. Lance Benoist and Simeon Thorson as well. Before losing to Mike Pierce. I think this has got a win for Brzezinski all over it. I think he'll do it by submission. I think he could do it in the first and second round. If I had to flip a coin, it'd go first round. On the FX card, we've got Edson Barboza against Rafael Oliveira. Barboza, the guy still can be really, really big in this division. He's the guy's just a beast on his feet. We've seen that with Terry Etam, the way he knocked him out. Great fights with Ross Pearson, which maybe I lost, who knows. Anthony Njokuani, There was the destruction of Mike Lulo when he first came into the UFC. He lost to Jamie Varner, got knocked out, which was a big shock when that happened. And he won his last fight against Lucas Martins away back in January when they were fighting back in Brazil. As well, Oliveira, I think it's his second stint in the UFC. He kind of won one, he lost one away back in the day. And he's back in the UFC. I think he beat Izquierdo the last time out. He did. Before that, 2 losses to a couple of veterans of the sport, and Eve Edwards and Gleison Tibau. But I think Edson Barbosa's brutal strikes is going to really take Oliveira out, and I think he'll do it very brutally within the first couple of rounds again. I can see Barbosa just lighting him up everywhere and knocking him out. So I'm going to go for Edson Barbosa, KO, TKO in the second round yet again. Next up, we're in the heavyweight division. We've got Gabriel Nepal Gonzaga against Dave Herman. Now, Dave Herman's coming back off a banned substances, and he's coming off 3 losses as well. So if he loses this one, he's out in his ass. Saying that his losses aren't to bad people. Losses to Big Nog, Roy Nelson, and Stefan Struve, who are all really tough fighters and top fighters in the division as well. A couple of wins before that, he beat, just the one win over John Olivainamo in the UFC, where he was 19-2 outside, 20-2 outside the UFC as well. Gabriel Gonzaga, I think he's coming back off a loss here as well. In his second stint in the UFC, fought for the title many years ago, but got knocked out by Travis Brown. Nasty knockout back in April. Before that, he had a couple of wins over Oliveira and Ben Rothwell as well. I think it's a really good fight for Dave Herman. I think he can catch Gonzaga and knock him out. If this goes to ground, I can see Gonzaga maybe submitting Dave Herman, but I think it's a good fight for Dave Herman to get back in the win column and stay in the company now that he's kind of back in the straight and narrow after being let back in the UFC after his ban finished. So Gabriel, I'm going to go for Dave Herman, by I think a late stoppage in the third, if not a decision. Next up, we've got Storm and Norman Park against Kazuki Takadome. Norman Park, I don't think many of the Americans will know Norman Park. He won the Smashes series over when it was the British versus the Aussies, and he beat Colin Fletcher in the final. He's a 17-2 record, and he mainly fought over here in Europe. In fact, I think he fought all over Europe, mostly kind of in England and Ireland as well. No really big wins, apart from the ones over Colin Fletcher. So he's new to a lot of people. If you haven't watched many fight cards from over here in Europe, he hasn't even fought in the big cards either. But as I say, he looked really impressive against Colin Fletcher back in December, and this is his big kind of debut onto the UFC, where he faces Takadome, who, if I remember right, is coming off a win of his own. I can't remember when it was. Cristiano Marcelo, nothing great really, let's be honest. From back in Japan from March the 3rd. I think it's a good fight for Storm and Norman Park. I think Park's going to catch him in a submission and get his win. I'm going to go second round. I'm going to go first round with this one. Norman Park to catch him by submission. If not, I think he'll get an easy decision all day long. So next up, we have the main fight of the FX card, which is Chris Weidman against Andrew Craig. Chris Weidman looked terrible last time out. It was his first time back after his ban against Derek Brunson, and it was just sloppy, very sloppy. He gassed out big time, as did Derek Brunson. I think the nerves kind of got to him. And this is a big fight for Chris Weidman because he's lost a couple of fights. He got banned, of course. So the company may let him go if he doesn't win this fight against Craig. He's had some great fights. He knocked out Wanderlei Silva very quickly. He lost to Brian Stam before that, but he went in a kind of tear within a couple of weeks. With his fight with Akiyama, which was a great fight, and then he knocked out Arn Simpson, which was a great knockout. So yeah, this is a big fight for Chris the Crippler Weidman. he needs the win here, and I think he maybe get it. I think it's going to be tough though, because Craig can bang as well. We've seen that. I think he knocked out Natal, and Natal maybe knocked him out. Sorry, got a terrible memory. Yeah, head kick, knockout over Rafael Natal. In San Jose, Munoz versus Weidman, and a win over Nope before that, before losing to a decision to Ronnie Marks in Brazil, which was always going to be tough because Marks is a decision fighter anyway. But he is dangerous on his feet. But I just like Chris Weidman in this fight, and I think he'll knock him out. Second round, my favourite as usual. No decisions so far, I don't think. Maybe Park will go to decision, but this is the kind of card that I like. On the main card, Cub Swanson versus Dennis Silva. This looks a really good fight. Now, Cub Swanson is probably in the best run of his career. He's taken out big fighters, knocked out one of my favourite fighters, took out one of my favourite fighters, in Dustin Poirier back in London in February, and looked very, very good in doing it. It was a close fight, but Cub Swanson always looked kind of the dominant one in that fight. Before that, he knocked out Charles Oliveira and Ross Pearson, two really tough fighters in the division, especially Ross Pearson. He took him out, he knocked him out. George Root he beat before that, and he lost to Ricardo Lamas, who's right on the end of maybe getting a title shot after the Korean Zombie. Dennis Silva, never been the biggest fan of his either. Really tough fighter, coming down from the lightweight division into the featherweight division. He's looked fairly decent. He's looked good. Wins over Diego Nunes and Nam Phan by decisions. But he's got some really horrible kicks, and if he catches you with them, spinning kicks to your body, you're in big trouble. He beat Matt Wyman, George Soteropoulos, Andrew Winner, so he's got some really top wins in there. He's only lost in these last 6 or 7 fights is to Donald the Cowboy Cerrone, who is one of the best at 155, so no shame in losing to one of the best in the division. This fight, I think, tough to call. It's a flip of the coin here. I think Cub Swanson will win this one. I think it'll be very close, and I think it'll go to a split decision. First decision of the night, but a really tough fight to call. But I'm going to go Cub Swanson by split decision. Next up in the middleweight division, we've got Mark Munoz making a return after a long time out. I think it's his first fight since UFC 138. In fact, it's not. It's Chris Weidman about a year ago, so I thought he was out longer than that, where he got knocked out devastatingly by Chris Weidman. When he's against Tim Boetsch, two hard-nosed wrestlers, two tough guys. This is another tough fight to call. As I say, Mark Munoz had he was on a run in that division. Beat Aaron Smith, CB Dollaway, Damien Maya, Chris Lieben, before losing to Weidman. Really good fight. I actually like Mark Munoz. He seems a really kind of quality guy to have in the sport, and a guy you'd probably like to train with, because he's one of the best wrestlers in the sport. Tim Boetsch, another really tough guy. We've seen that against Yushin Okami. Probably lost the first 2 rounds, comes back and just blitzes Yushin Thunder Okami, knocks him out, and then goes on a run himself. He was on a run, beat Kendall Grove, Nick Ring, he beat Hector Lombard before getting knocked out by Costa Filippi, which was a shock to me. A tough fight. This is the flick of the coin yet again. I think I'm going to go. Let me see. I'm going to go Mark Munoz just by another decision, which isn't great for the main card. Is having a couple of decisions. Hopefully they're great fights though. Next up, we're into the middleweight division again. We've got Tim Kennedy against Roger Gracie. Now, Tim Kennedy, I ain't a fan of Tim Kennedy. I don't really like him. I'm not going to really say much about him. He's got a 15-4 record. Beat Trevor Smith last time out. Lost to Rockhold. Beat Robbie Lawler, Melvin Manhoef. Lost to Jackery. So don't really like him. I hope Roger Gracie absolutely destroys him in this fight. I hope he gets him down. I hope he takes his neck and chokes the life out of him. Roger Gracie, how can you not kind of root in one of the Gracies? And a really nice guy as well. 6-1 record. His only loss is to King Mo, who's he got knocked out, and it was devastating. And we've seen what King Mo can do. He did it in Bellator last week. He did it over there, and he looked devastating doing it. when he beat Seth Petrozelli over there. So I think you all know who I'm going to go for already. Roger Gracie, one of the best jiu-jitsu guys there is in the sport, maybe the top. So I'm hoping he submits Kennedy here, and I hope he does it with a guillotine choke. Second round as well. And then we're on to the co-main event, which is a really interesting matchup. I didn't think this was going to happen when I first heard it. It's Frankie Edgar against Charles Oliveira. Frankie Edgar, probably the second best lightweight of all time, maybe. Behind BJ Penn, even though he beat him a couple of times. Coming off 3 losses, 3 really tough losses though. His Benson Henderson fights could have went either way. I think he had the second fight, UFC 150, and if that fight kind of went on another round or two against Jose Aldo, I think he would have taken that. But really, really close fights. He was a champion. He beat Gray Maynard. He beat PJ Penn. He was one of the best lightweights of all time. And he's got a fight here against Charles Oliveira, which it's just a weird fight. I never ever thought I would see this kind of fight for Frankie Edgar. But he's trying to build himself up in the division again to get a shot at Aldo, so I suppose he has to kind of go back to maybe the top 10 guys and start the top 10 guys to get that. He's coming off a loss though to Cub Swanson when he got knocked out at UFC 152 in Toronto last year. He missed weight as well, so if this happens again, I think Frankie Edgar will knock him out anyway. I think he's a total different class opponent for Charles Oliveira here, and I think he will get absolutely decimated by Frankie Edgar, and he'll get knocked out in the second round. Very, very good in the ground, but I think even if he goes to the ground with Frankie Edgar, he works with Renzo Gracie and Ricardo Almeida as well. He's gonna be pretty savvy in the ground, and that's kind of the only way that Charles Oliveira can really kind of hurt Frankie Edgar. So I'm going to go Frankie Edgar, second round knockout. First or second round, I don't really know. I'll go second though. And next we've got the best middleweight there's ever been in Anderson Silva against Chris Weidman. I like Chris Weidman in this fight, and everybody is picking Chris Weidman in this fight. Now, the only reason I'm picking Chris Weidman, there's a lot of kind of company guys saying I kind of picking Chris Weidman. I think they're saying, oh, Chris Weidman's going to do it, but there's a lot of fighters picking Chris Weidman here. I think he's got the talents to do it, but I just want to do it because I think Anderson Silva, I don't particularly like him as a man. That Damien Maia fight just doesn't sit right with me. It has never sat right with me at all, which is probably something I really shouldn't hold against him, because he's come back and he's been kind of a good guy, and he's fought and he's looked very good against Belfort and Bonner and everybody else who he fought. He's come in and did his job, looked one of the best ever, and just been probably the number one pound for pound guy in the whole mixed martial arts. Even though I'd like to say John Jones is with the quality opponents he's taken out compared to maybe Anderson Silva. While Anderson Silva is still in the sport and he's still winning, you can't really say he's not the number one guy in the sport. Chris Weidman, devastating knockout of Mark Munoz. Short notice against a very dangerous opponent in Damien Maia, came in and looked very, very good in that fight, even though you could see he never had much in the tank. And I really want this guy to win for the simple fact that last year, I think it was last year, I could be wrong, I apologise if I'm wrong, his house got decimated by, I think it was Hurricane Sandy. And I watched some of the videos and it was devastating to hear kind of stuff like that, and he seems like a really normal guy, hard-working guy. So I'm going to go with Chris Weidman here for the big upset. There's a lot of people picking Chris Weidman here. I'm one of them, just for the fact I'm not a big fan of Anderson Silva, and always pick against him anyway. So Chris Weidman will get a decision win here. If he doesn't want to stand with Anderson Silva. Nobody wants to stand with Anderson Silva. If he can get him to the ground like Chael Sonnen did, and he's a very good wrestler as well with great jiu-jitsu, he could possibly get the referee to stop the fight, or maybe even submit him. So that is my picks for UFC 162 from Las Vegas. Really looking forward to the card. We've had kind of a break from the UFC for a little bit, and we're going to have another break after this. Our next fight is a UFC in Fox, which looked kind of weak on paper. July 27th, so we've got another 3 weeks to wait after that, which is quite a wait for the middle of the summer. Where it's headlined by the flyweights Demetrius Johnson and John Moraga, with a really tasty co-main event between Ronan McDonald and Jake Ellenberger. So that's my picks for UFC 162. I'll be back right before probably about the 22nd of July for UFC on Fox. If you could share this video or like it, I'd greatly appreciate it. Come and follow me on Twitter at BigBulba7MMA. And go and follow some of the other great vloggers that we have on Twitter. Chris Kyle MMA, the Surfer Kane, A Girl MMA are always good. Look at Mr. Myers as well, who I've kind of looked at as well. Kind of recently, I'm a new follower of his. So go follow those guys. But just to say, share this and kind of help me a little bit here. And I would appreciate that very much. So I'll be back in a few weeks for UFC on Fox, Johnson versus Moraga. Enjoy the fights when they come around next week. And take care.